Good. Now I'll go ahead and transform this script into an object-oriented programming style. So in other words, I'll organize these functions in a more efficient way. And just to refresh your memory, what this script does, so we have a backend and front-end script, and the front-end, what it does is it constructs the graphical user interface, so you know that. And we have this books.db database file, and there are some data there, and you can search for entries, so for rows in the database, add new, and so on. And this frontend.py constructs the graphical user interface, and this backend is responsible for the database interaction. And so object-oriented programming is about encapsulating functions inside a class. So class, and let's call this database. And yeah, that's it basically. We still have a lot of things to do, but let's think about what is this database class. Well, whenever you decide to use object-oriented programming, you first need to think about the object that you want to use, which is the object that you want to apply these methods to. And in our case, that would be the database. And so then we insert data to the tables of this database and view data and so on. Now this object, you first need to create a minimal object when you call the class. And I'll show you how you call a class in a minute. But for now, let's focus on creating the blueprint of the object. So you create the blueprint of the object, which is this one here. And then you create object instances using that blueprint. And you do that by calling the class. Now, when you call the class, you want to have this minimal object. So in this case, that would be to establish a connection to this database, and then create a cursor object and maybe check for a table, so that you make sure that your database has a table, so that it allows you to later apply methods to this table of the database. Otherwise, the database would be useless. So it needs to have a table and an established connection. That means you have to figure out a way that when you call the class, these lines here are executed. And Python has reserved a special syntax for that. So the first function of your script, you need to call it init with a double underscore in front and on the back. So that's an init function, which means initialize an object. In other programming languages, that is called a constructor, so it constructs the object. So when you call a class, this function is executed, but not the other ones. The other ones are executed if you refer to them. Like in this case, that would be something like a database dot insert, and then you pass the parameters, the arguments there. Now we have quite a few things to add here in the script for this to work, but I would prefer to do this on a trial and error basis. So we execute it, we'll see what error we get, so that you understand how things are working there. So what I'll do, I'll call this class as it is now. So we don't need this function. This function is gone now because I replaced that with init. So you don't call functions anymore like we did here. So for instance, here we are calling functions from the backend module, so which is like a module. You are importing this as a module. And in this case now, what we do is from backend import database. So we import the database class from the backend script. So that makes available the database class for us, so the database blueprint. So this is just a blueprint. Now we need to create an object out of this blueprint. So let's call that object database. That would be equal to database, so the class. And for now, let's not pass any arguments there. And then we need to replace these references, so we don't do backend anymore, we do database.view. So we are referring to the view function of the database object, which is an instance of this class. Great. So I'll go ahead and replace these other ones with database. So backend, replace that, replace. Yeah, that's it. This is the script name, and it should be like that. Escape here. Great. Now I'll go ahead and execute that. So don't expect this to work, but we have to look closely to the error, trying to understand what it says. So traceback file frontend.py line 4 here. So init takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. And what's happening here now is that when you call the class, this class will create an object instance and store it in this variable, and then it sends this object instance to this function. So let me split this on the right so that we have both the scripts in here, so the front end and the back end. So basically this database object instance is being sent to this init object, even though this is an empty bracket. So that's like a hidden syntax there. And to fix this, you need to perform a trick here. So it says init takes 0 positional arguments because it has an empty bracket here, so it's like a normal function. And functions, if you don't put a parameter there, but then you pass a parameter when you call it, the function will say, I don't take any positional arguments or any mandatory arguments, but 1 argument was given to me, so I'll throw an error. Now to fix that, you need to pass a parameter there, and everyone passes self there. So you can pass any word that will still work, but as a convention, so that your code is readable by other people, you need to pass self. So now your init function takes a parameter, and when you call this class will send the object instance, and that object instance will go inside this parameter. So this parameter will be replaced by the object instance argument. Great. If you still don't understand that, I'm sure you'll do so later as you write more classes. Good. Now I'll go ahead and save this and try out the script again. And great, so that means that the class was successfully initialized and it created an object instance for us. Now let me close this and maybe add something there. This is not necessary, but just to show you that if you want to add more parameters to your init function, you do something like db and then replace this with db, and then here you pass the argument that will be passed to this db parameter. So that would be books.db, the file path to our database. Great, and if you execute this again, you get the same result. So what's happening here is that Python is first sending the database object instance and to the self parameter, and then it sends the path of the file to the db parameter, and that db parameter sends that file path to the db parameter of the connect method. Great, now let's see how these methods will work. So we have the view all button, which if we press it, what will happen is the view function of the database class, actually the view method of the database class will be executed. So this one here, let's see if we are able to get it. Well, an error. Let me close this. So it says view takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. So that again suggests that when you call a method of a class, the class is sending the object instance to that method as well, just as it did with the init function. That means we need to do the trick again. So just pass self there, and yeah, try out again. See what error we get this time. Well, no error, things are working, obviously. So that's great. However, if you try the other methods now, like insert, you'll probably get an error. So let me try that. So view all is working fine, but if we insert something, let's say hey there, and yep, add entry. So insert takes 4 positional arguments, but 5 were given. So insert, and these values are being passed to these parameters, but also we're passing the object instance. So let's go ahead and self there, and I'll do the same for search as well. Delete and update. And yeah, that's what we have. Looks good. And let's try out again. So view all and add entry, and yeah, this seems like it's working. View all, and here we have hey there. Close. So we were able to create a class and put all the functions inside that class. So we have an organized program now. And so that's object-oriented programming, but object-oriented programming is not simply about putting some functions inside a class. Object-oriented programming is about good design. So this script is not probably the best design that we can come up with. Why is that? Because we're not making use of the real advantages that we have by using classes. So what I mean is that here we are creating these methods, and in each method we're executing some close functions, and also creating a connection in each of the methods. So we can reduce this code furthermore by removing the repeated actions. So in a class, what you need to think about is a way of constructing something at first, so in the init function, and then you refer to that something in the other functions, in the other methods. So we're talking about methods here. So even though our script is working fine, in the next lecture we will go ahead and improve the design of it. So I'll see you there.